Okay, so I'm interested today in talking a little bit about AI detection and kind of what we imagine that might do, some of the myths about it, and what are the potentially problematic sides of this. So, when we're talking about AI detection, you're probably thinking a lot about some of the tools that you've seen online or some of the ones that are built into Canvas. So, as you know, if you use Turnitin on Canvas, you have to basically sign in and sort of essentially fill in some consent forms and it'll give you a score from 0 to 100%. Typically, this is not shown to students, which I think is an interesting kind of show from their point of view, essentially. So I'll use this as an example, something like GPT-0 as well, which is another example, is a product that does paid AI detection in addition. And I think there's a number of issues. I think one of the things that we want to imagine when we think about AI detection is that it's simply we're introducing a new problem and that AI detection will simply remove it and then we can return back to the way things are. And unfortunately, I think that creates some challenge. One of the first questions I'm always interested in is what is being detected? Because I think when we talk about AI detection, we often imagine things in the old school way, right? You've got writing in some form and then someone is going off and they are dropping it into ChatGPT and they're returning something. And I think that's the model we inherited from a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, the reality just isn't the same thing right now. Particularly, I think a lot of students are used to and have used embedded versions of this for years. The most obvious one is Grammarly. And what Grammarly can do and other tools like it can do, you can build in agents and things into Microsoft Word using some the latest ones online. Copilot will do similar things. What Grammarly does basically is it's a sort of plugin that works with something like Google Docs, right? And a lot of students will be using something like Google Docs because that's what they're trained. They've used Google Classroom and similar products in K-12. And Grammarly tends to give you options, right? It'll highlight certain things. It'll tell you things. I have students that say they use Grammarly because they didn't know that there was a built-in grammar checker of any kind in Google Docs, which was sort of mind-blowing to me. But Grammarly has this insidious second option, right, which isn't just this, but then you can click to make it more professional, right? And at the core underneath this, right, is an LLM, a large language model. It's a form of general AI, and it will reword something in a particular way, right? And what it ends up doing, again, is something that it's going to trigger, and some would say rightfully, some would say not. It's going to trigger AI detection, and the student will come in and explain that in their mind they wrote the entire paper, and the AI detection is going to flag this as 100%. And suddenly we not only have an academic integrity problem, now we have a culture and communication problem. So I think there's a number of issues when it comes to this, and we'll sort of talk a little bit about proof, some of the downsides. I think there's equity downsides when it comes to AI detection that I think we also need to talk about. So first of all, how do these things work, right? If you have an AI detection system, typically what it's going to do is take a segment of text, right? And it's going to need a certain amount of text. It will tokenize it, put it through an AI model of their own, and then look for certain markers, right? And again, I've taken examples of student writing on a private server that doesn't leave anywhere, and I've tried to use a similar method for my own, so measuring um, average length of phrases, average sort of score of reading level and other things to try to identify which things are most likely to be human and which are not. And this can provide you some interesting data, but what it doesn't provide is proof. And I think that's one of the big issues, right? There's a big difference between plagiarism where you can show here's something, or plagiarism in the traditional sense, where you can say, yes, this was published in 1983. I have the document here. It's weird that you have this here. It's statistically unlikely that there's any overlap. Here, because it's being generated new for the first time, you can't necessarily just say, hey, I found this here, right? And one of the things I'm always interested in, right, is to make sure that when we are enforcing this, that we can enforce it fairly and that we can enforce it in a way that is truly enforceable, right? We don't want to be able to say, here's something, and then students will say, well, you can go to the chair, you can go to the dean, and it's not going to hold up, right? And again, we don't want to be embroiled in issues of legal action. Turnitin is a system that does things through our own. Again, I think it can show markers. I think it's, there's a lot of debate, I think, about the ethics of using these, the privacy of using these. Turnitin is a complex issue. I think there may be a place for AI detection in the future. But something like GPT-0 and other similar products, right? These are free, they're online. They make money in a couple different ways, right? One is they, um, again, can try to sell a higher subscription model of this. The other option is, right, they have users channeling human created and other writing into it, right? And so they are basically sponges designed to soak up data. And I think especially anything that would include a student name, anything that would include identifiable information, and anything in which students have not specifically consented for their information to be sent out that way, I think we run into an ethical problem, right? And again, that's separate from the legal issues, right, when it comes to something like FERPA. But I think ethically, right, I think that raises questions for us. Again, I don't necessarily want my writing to be put into something like this. And I think there's reasons why that would give us pause. Um, there's also some challenges when it comes to proof, right? One of the things it looks for is what people might call a robotic style, right? And I think part of this is an aesthetic judgment. It's not simply one versus the other. And one of the things it tends to do more than not, and this has been shown in a few early studies, is that students who are neurodivergent, students who may be autistic or other sort of neurodiverse students, the writing may be flagged more often than other students because they will tend to use very effectively the formulas with which we have trained them to write. In other words, we have told them, yes, write in this format, do this and do this in this style and in this order, and then the student does it, and then it flags it and says, hey, that sounds really robotic. Because we've asked them to do that, right? And I think one of the downsides is that sometimes students can feel, right? I think the risks and the trust that breaks, I think is an immense risk, right? And I think there's an immense sort of challenge to that, right? And I think one of the challenges in addition to this, right, is that again, how we define academic integrity really needs to be made explicit because again, students are not only taking their prompts and dropping it straight into ChatGPT, but they might take something and just say, oh, here's an auto suggest. I'm going to keep yes. I'm going to keep saying yes, yes, yes. I'm going to auto complete that sentence. And suddenly before they know it, it's going to read 100% AI through and something like Turnitin, right? And I think that creates a lot of issues. There are some tells, right? I think in addition, and I often say what you need ultimately when it comes to dealing with detection and sort of working with enforcement is, I think the only real substitute has to be multiple sources of evidence or of proof, because I think a single thing that says, here's a flag, here's a marker to say, right, if it reaches this point, then for sure it's AI, I think is not really defensible based on the technology that we have. And so multiple sources, right? So, classically in writing classes, we've used things like writing samples as diagnostics, having multiple drafts and opportunity for students to work with and revise drafts in process, introducing forms of documentation, whether it's tracking changes or version history or something like that in a way that is using school enterprise level privacy would be other ways into this. And there are some tells when it comes to AI sort of writing, right? Whether it's from Grammarly at the sentence level or another model at the larger level, right? One of the things that we tend to see is refinement at the sentence level. So individual sentence sounds good, but when you read them all together, the meaning is kind of gone, right? And this happens not because the AI can't write well, but because what they're asking it to do is expensive, right? Context memory is one of the most expensive elements when it comes to running an LLM. And so what you'll get is one or two sentences that each sentence makes sense with the previous sentence. But when you try to bring it out across the whole paragraph or to the previous paragraph, suddenly things aren't lining up, right? They'll talk about one thing, it'll just get lost into the other thing, right? And that's not it's not necessarily a limitation of the technology per se, but it's a limitation of the free models that a lot of students are doing. I also think things like low effort or missing citations, incorrect citations, hallucinated citations tend to be places where those show up quite a lot. There's also markers of, again, within documents itself. If you really want to get into it, there's things like in a Word document in the XML. There's formatting things that can be kind of telling of it, but I think that detection is still kind of on the frontier right now. And what this means, though, is, right, I think when it comes to enforcement, it can't be a single solution, right? The magic bullet does not exist. And I know for sure that Turnitin is not that magic bullet, right? In many cases, when we come to detection, I think so many of the ways to address it are upstream issues, right? Whether it comes to ways of making students accountable, whether it's in person, whether it's accountable to do something or to show their knowledge in some way, I think it can do a lot. Right? Again, sometimes working outside the traditional paper format can be really useful. But I think there's lots of ways that we can start thinking about that I think AI detection is not going to just instantly return things to the way they were, right? And I think it creates, I think it sells us that myth, right? Administrators and others will be sort of presented with products like that will sell that myth. But in reality, right, it has to be multiple layers, right? To say, here's ways in which I've seen you write all semester in these ways. Now, here's a completely different voice. Or, we've used these sources, but now this source does not seem to exist, right? And again, many cases, right? Again, if you're weak at the paragraph level, the ideas aren't coming through, the citations are not done well. Those are things that are, again, part of traditional academic integrity, part of the assignment itself. And a good rubric can capture those things, even if we aren't able to definitively say, yes, I've gone in time, and was able to peek and see that. I think that creates issues as well. So when we're talking about those types of issues, again, multiple ways of investigating that, I think is really the best way. And thinking about upstream assignment issues, which we'll talk about some of those factors otherwise, I think is a way in as well. So it's not necessarily reliable, it's not necessarily trustworthy or equitable, but it can be a tool, right? If you're using one of the school ones along with others that might begin to build a case, begin to build a sense of here's what the balance of evidence is leading us towards.